make it.
Yeah. Really cool.
Alright, well, welcome back to CAA.
It's good to be here.
Michelle, do you think you can pray for us right quick?
Yeah, sure thing.
And for Emily.
And for?
Emily.
Emily, your friend? Well, okay, yes. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this beautiful day. Thank you for each person here that you've brought here tonight, God. Thank you for your goodness and your grace, God. We thank you and we praise you, God. And we thank you for this time to talk with each other. We pray that, God, you'd bless us with your wisdom on the topics we're going to discuss, God. We pray that you'd bless those who couldn't make it. We pray that you bless Emily, Lord. And we pray that she would come to see your light, God, and to see the love and the kindness and compassion you have for her and for each of us, God. Thank you again for this evening, and may we delight in you, rejoice in you, and be glad in all things. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Well, tonight, I think this might be a two-part one. I didn't read the book because I was doing a lot of stuff last week, and I didn't tell everybody else what to read, so tonight's subject is going to be on sex, art, and God.
Boring.
I'm sorry.
I should have brought Emily here. She would have loved it.
That's why you got to show up.
These cheese biscuits are amazing. Well done.
Eat about 2
They're so good.
Let's see. So, I didn't really think about a lot what I wanted to say, and I think that's fine because I'm sure we will have plenty to say on this topic. But the two things that were at the forefront of my mind was one from this book.
Hi, Nick.
Hey, everybody. Hi, Nick. Just in time. Ben, but he'll be back in 15
Sit right here.
minutes.
You can sit next to me, Mr. Collins.
Right on time. Excellent.
We're talking about pretty boring stuff tonight,
Yeah.
Nick. You should have skipped.
So, this book, Sex Gods by Rob Bell.
You know, you can't mention him. He wrote that heretic. You can't mention him.
I know every other thing out of his mouth is wrong now because of other things he said. He's not allowed to have any valid points on anything. This was a good book. Very quick read. Some interesting points. I think the one point that struck me the most was how he defined sexuality, in that he talked about how when we think about sex as a topic, we focus on the one act of sex versus thinking of ourselves as sexual beings as an entire concept. So, you know, God made male and female. Everybody's got food today.
This is a great day. What is this? This is a picnic day.
Some beans I put in my mouth.
No, thank you.
Love beans. Oh man, I love those.
So he used this example of there being a woman he knew who was very sexually active, but he said she was not a sexually alive person because even though she was very much in the act of sex, you look in her eyes and she just didn't have any life or any passion or fire. She was dead, even though she was very much doing a lot of sexual activity. And then she said he had another friend who was helping enslaved, sex-trafficked women. I said this person was actually abstinent, but yet every time you looked into this person's eyes, it was just like a life, a fire, something of substance there. So I thought that was an interesting point that I had never heard anyone mention. And then he talked about how, you know, if you lust after a girl physically, like you're denying the other 2/3 of her sexuality. Like she also has a mind, spirit, and body. So then just thinking about how God created us as a whole being, and that sex is not something that is just reduced to a single act. I think the other thing I wanted to throw out there was... it was about sex and art. What was it? Well, there's a couple. One other thing is... I think if you start to see yourself as a sexual being... Oh, yeah, I didn't bring the bear. He's in the room.
Oh, Teddy. I'll go grab him. Do we want him? I'll go grab him.
You can get him.
Because he's just like, I really want to be here for the conversation.
Yes. But if you
It's
think,
a very sensual experience for him to fly through the air like that.
Yeah.
oh, good, you said the right word. Oh yeah, we talked about sensual last week and how sensual doesn't mean necessarily sexual. It means of the senses. And I just heard somebody on TV the other day say, he said, sensuality does not mean sexual, but sex can be sensual. But thinking about art, I think as I read this book and then I read other things, I also found this interesting connection between art, work, and sex, and how all of them are like a type of energy of creating, producing something. And so then I started thinking about, as I talk about often, how people, they don't express themselves creatively during the week, and so then what do on Friday and Saturday night? They end up trying to find all of these sexual experiences, with people. And so I think there's a connection directly between the kind of creative energy and then like the sexually creative energy, because in both you're creating either artwork or you're creating a human being. So if you start to see yourself as a sexual being, as a total package, and not just this single act that you do with someone, then you start to rethink your whole life and how does everything impact everything else. So if you are not being creative, it could very well be also linked to your sexual part of yourself, that like the actual sexual part, and vice versa. The other thing I was thinking about was, thank you, art and sex. What was something I was thinking about art and sex?
Can I say something?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Go.
Oh yeah. I didn't really actually read the book, but I feel like I read a lot of books through Bernard and Daniel. And
Proxy reading.
yeah, secondhand reading. So what was I going to say? Oh, a really big point too, and I don't know if you mentioned it while I was grabbing Green Bear, was that the idea that the fact that sex itself is marriage is a big thing, because then if you go into the discussion of premarital sex, that wouldn't make sense. We talk a lot about abstaining, but we don't always communicate exactly why. And perhaps for some, they just had from the onset the discussion that if you have sex with a person, you're married to them. But or that biblically speaking, you would be married to them. But I mean, the how it worked in the Old Testament is that you would just two people would lay with each other, and then you would have the wedding banquet, because it was the fact that they were married in that act in the act of sex, they would be married. So, that's all.
Wait, let me just finish the last thing I was thinking, and then I'll throw. The other thing I was thinking about, and I don't even remember if this is the other point, but another point just thought of. If we think about ourselves as sexual beings as a whole and not just reduced to the act, then we start to see how all of life is, how do I express it? It's like we're gypping ourselves of a sexual experience. Like if we only think about the actual act of sex, God is like, what are you fools doing? Everything is a kind of sex, a kind of interchange between things. So art is a kind of sex, relationships is a type of sex. Are they all sex as an act in themselves, like intercourse? No, but they're all a sense of God showing you that there's supposed to be connection and intimacy and pleasure in everything you do. So we're kind of actually missing out, as we talked about last time, we're too easily pleased. God looks at us and he's like, that's all y'all doing is y'all call that sex? It's like, no, everything you're doing when you're cooking is supposed to be a type of sex. The way you think about, but people have a problem with that because we've equated sex with bad, especially in church. So if you start to relate other things to sex, then it's like, oh, you're becoming dirty now. It's like, well, I didn't invent sex. I didn't come up with this idea. God created this idea. And just because something has become misused doesn't make it inherently bad. So I think that's a huge part, especially trying to talk about sex in art as a Christian, it's already considered taboo. Like, oh, you can't really go too close to it. You can kind of bring it up and say things like, guys be pure, girls be pure, but that's as deep as it goes. And then people have all these questions about sex, and they never get answered. And then they end up trying to figure it out on their own, and then people are like blown away that certain things happen. People go crazy and try to find sexual experiences. Like, well, you never educated them. Like, you never gave them the knowledge and the wisdom of what God says about sex, and so therefore they went out and tried to find out on their own. As we said here once, we were talking to my friend said, she was like, I don't understand how people see these priests who try to like withhold themselves from sex with their sheer force, and then are surprised when like all these like Catholic boys scandals come out. And then I said something about I said, yeah, because the priest, I was like, the priests, they stay celibate because they don't want to be distracted. And then Daniel said, you know what else is distracting? Sex scandals with boys. So there's that note.
Just to reiterate what you were saying, the part that I liked best about Sex God was just the emphasis on connection, and how sexuality is to be connected, and how you can be an incredibly sexual person and be abstinent, and the fact that you're connected to so many people and in so many meaningful relationships and meaningful just like modes of being. I just thought that was really beautiful.
The problem is we're so down the rabbit hole on our misunderstanding of sex that stuff like that sounds like a cheap excuse for denying the fact of the matter, when exactly it's the opposite. Well, what you're saying is right, but the problem is our culture has so contaminated. I mean, this is a big climb for the culture to get out of this one, because we have so corrupted and lost a sense of what sex is that it will be very hard to fix it, but I think it's key to fixing a whole lot of things. In ancient languages, you had masculine and feminine. Words were considered masculine and feminine. Trees would be feminine. Particular entities would have a sexuality, because the ancients understood that everything had a sex. Sex was the very energy of being. It was being. You could almost put it in sense of, if you wanted to, any relation of an I with an other or a other thing is a sexual relationship. It's that encounter that is what we mean by sex. And the term sex then is the purest form of an encounter. It's believed, that you can't get any more close to an other than in, the act of sex. So that's why we chose that word. Also, the reason we use the word intercourse to mean sex, which also means speak, is because speaking in words used to be so associated with sexuality. Like you would say a tree, like I was saying, feminine genitive and feminine masculine and all of that. It would be interesting to see the history of when our understanding of sex was divided. How this slow change happened, I don't quite know. I'd like to read up on it. I think Foucault has a book on sexuality, the history of sexuality. But two, what is important, and he does bring that up in the book, where sex equals marriage. If you get that straight, then suddenly there's a reason. Hey, Jonathan! Then suddenly there's a reason to abstain from sex. Right now, parents are like, hey, you shouldn't have sex. It's like, well, why? Because you shouldn't. There's not much of a positive reason. There's a negative reason, but there's not a positive reason. So fixing that would change it from right now it feels a kind of lot like law versus, no, it's to your benefit, actually. And actually it would also return the sanctity of marriage. Right now there's kind of a sense of why exactly is marriage sanctified? Hey, Jonathan, we're having a class on Christian Artists Anonymous, and we're talking about sex, art, and God, three pretty banal topics, and it's really good to see you. Jonathan's great.
Yeah,
everyone, Jonathan's
I
great.
just got a pet lizard, and I realized I haven't thought about sex in a week because I'm so excited about having a pet lizard.
Wow, that's a sexual act.
Having a lizard?
No, to think about a wizard so much, to be so excited by that entity.
Really cool.
It is really cool.
I think it's...
That's what we're doing, Jonathan.
Sounds fantastic.
Would you like a chair, or are you...
I'm probably going to roll back.
I hear you.
Roll on and just stop.
Okay.
Yeah, good to see you, Jonathan.
Thank you for stopping by.
You're a beautiful man. If you want flowers in your hair, Rachel will be happy to put them there.
Oh,
Yeah,
flowers.
well, think about it. There you go. Well,
She's saying my hair and I thought she said hair.
I did said hair, but now there you go. Oh yeah.
Oh yes.
Yeah, Dionysus right there. Good. Looking good,
Give
man.
him a flower swag.
Yeah, definitely. Good to see you, Jonathan.
See you all later.
Love you.
Have a good talk.
We will,
Thank you so
of
much.
course. Like the separation of sex and marriage, which I think was really emphasized after the sexual revolution, but it was clearly lost before that even because you had mistresses and all that sort of stuff before. But once you get that sex equals marriage, then suddenly it makes sense for why marriage is sacred. It makes sense why you would abstain from sex. And also things like premarital sex, homosexual marriage, etc., so forth, would no longer be controversial because it's not possible to have premarital sex because to have sex is to be married. And also you can't have homosexual marriage because you can't have the act of sex in the female masculine sense. Now, whether or not a homosexual couple should live together, now that's a political question. But then this is actually why Socrates would start every dialogue defining the terms so slowly, because if you have a different definition for sex, well then you have to have a debate about premarital sex. But if you had a good definition of sex where you mixed it with marriage, then you wouldn't even have to have that debate. So definitions are important.
According to, not like we're defining our terms, so we don't have to go into what actually constitutes a sex. Then we don't need to do that. But at the same time, what's that? Okay, Greenberg wanted me to tell everybody that. Yeah, that's a good thought. That the sex between a male and a female always has like the possibility for creating.
Yeah.
Whereas you don't have that in a homosexual sexual act. But that's just a thought. Just tossing it out there. But I think this is also why sex is so so linked with art, because it has that ability to create.
It's very clear in the Bible that that a man and a woman become one flesh, and that is what happens in a marriage. That two individuals, once they marry, are now one body, which means that any interaction these two people have with one another is the same as one person may have with his own body, which means that if there's something between the two of them and then that person, one of those people, does something to somebody else, they're actually taking part of their body and having a very complicated mix-up with the world separate from their own body. It's like cutting off an arm or a leg and then participating in something. They're just throwing off everything.
Going back to Anne's point about the connectedness, the other thing that I find interesting is, like, to use a term like connection, I think has an interesting effect in that we're so saturated with images of sexual intercourse that when people start saying, well, sex is not just about, it's like we have to like give sex a makeover to make ourselves believe it really is good. Like,
right.
It's really about connection and intimacy, and we just want to connect with people and really find something deeper. And we're like, that's not what it's about. Come on, it's about getting in bed and like it being, like the way you see it on TV. So we've trained our brains to not think about sex in what I guess God created it to be, because the world presents these much more sensual, using the word in the way I said we shouldn't use it, but we think that the way the world presents sex is the way that sex is meant to be. So then when you go to church and the pastor says, God wants you to have sex, and it's about intimacy, and it's about connecting, we don't really believe the preacher, because we think he's just trying to like make it digestible, or he's just trying to make it so it's more wholesome. Like he wants us to talk about sex, but he wants to make sure we do it in this proper, wholesome way. So I think there's just something about the way that our minds are now shaped very much to only think about sex as the act, so that when you do think about connection and when you do think about broader implications, we can't really receive it as true.
There's this prevalent view of a relationship between a man and a woman in our society that's essentially I am going to treat you as a planet, and I'm going to bury myself in you and hide there because I don't want to face the world all by myself, but when I'm near you, I can be protected from everything. Basically, I'm going to turn myself into a little mite and hide among your feathers, at least some of the time. And it's the same idea as when they're selling a product for cleaning your kitchen or something. It's like, I'm going to find satisfaction in the way this is scented, or the way this makes the windows glisten. Some very teeny tiny thing that's not really on the human scale becomes a temporary satisfaction. Basically, because I can't find true satisfaction, I can at least bury myself in this for now.
Well, you can go first because I forgot, so I needed a little bit of time to think.
To both of Rachel's points, you're right. Most people treat love as an escapism rather than rather than a self-realization, which entails no running away. It is interesting. We tend to fall. Well, one of the tricks of love, or true love, is to move beyond your idea of someone to their true self. It's very easy to love an idea of someone. It's very hard to love an actual person. And often the sort of love that you're describing, Rachel, is the escapist love. We create an idea of someone who it is, and we go and find shelter in it. And it's only a matter of time before that person can't bear the weight, because their true self starts breaking through.
And you're not talking about the many, many, many times of choosing a committed approach toward your interaction with a person, as opposed to it's about me needing them versus me giving to this person because God tells me to.
Yeah, the Trinity is a pure giving relationship. There's no need between the Father, the Spirit, and the Son. It's all giving, and their relationship with us is pure giving. God doesn't need us. He just wants to give to us. And likewise, our relationships must be the same. The reason why marriage is hard is because it's always hard to interact with a true person, and it's only a matter of time before a true person comes out. But likewise, there's no other way to have true love than with true people. To your other point, Rachel, on sort of cutting yourself apart, this is why having, say, sexual relations with multiple people is problematic, because you're just tearing yourself to pieces more and more and more. And it's only a matter of time before that neurosis gets the best of you. I think too, on Mr. Hankins' point and how we need to revitalize our idea of sex, I think this can get into where art can play a role. There's this nice part from The Mind, page 91 of the book. I'll just read it to you, where it's talking about the cross, but the same could be said about anything. It is easy to state the bare facts of the cross. The difficulty is to do it in a way that is consistent with the rest of our art and that engages our audience. And here we go. It is easy to write a song that says, "The Savior of the world died on a tree in order to save you and me," but how many people have their perceptions rattled by such language? One can say that the crisis we have with talking about sex is the same as talking about the cross. Art should be helping us see things as if we had never seen them before. "We need to clean our windows," said J.R.R. Tolkien, "so that the things seen clearly may be freed from the drab blur of triteness or familiarity." We must do the same with sex.
I really am curious as to what my perception, I think, of sexuality would be like if I hadn't had exposure to it through media, because
That's right.
plays a huge role in how one views it, or potentially, grows any type of, relationship with the concept of sex. I think it's a big factor. So I'm curious as to how that would have changed for me had I not been exposed to movies or TV shows. And one quick other thing, what, Dan, isn't there like a word in Latin? What's the Latin word for sex? Doesn't it mean like to separate, actually, or to come together? You said in Professor Wolford's class one time.
Oh,
Okay,
Michelle.
I'm so sorry. I'm putting you on a Latin word.
Michelle, give me a minute.
I'm sorry. Okay, so
Just a minute.
let's just pretend that and it doesn't really work. Then I'll get back.
But what was your point? Go on and say your point.
I thought there was something
Lisa.
about sex, like there's a letter that means it's like X, as in it sometimes means to be to splice, kind of like to be in two, but also the word sex means to bring together. It's like the same at the same time. It's two, both definitions at the same time. Does it sound like I'm just
I will have to remember what I said in Professor Wolford's class.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I don't think I was making it up in Professor. It's very possible.
I remembered it as like the smartest thing from that class that I remember.
Wow, and I don't remember. That is problematic. That's either a really bad indication of the quality of the class,
No,
or
it's
yeah, I know that's the problem. So
Okay, I'll just say
was that
what
in regard to? I'm gonna have to work on
It's
that.
just the word for sex in Latin.
All right.
Okay,
I
whatever.
wrote it down then. I mean,
Okay,
it's
but
written down somewhere.
gonna say
One of
the
those
extract-
Sorry to
files.
just fall out of the sky because we're so used to just like opening another tab and Googling it right now.
That's true. Yeah, you're right.
Mr.
Yeah, Latin
word,
for sex, man. Look that up.
Slash
It's
internet.
hard to find. Google Translate it.
The sex in Latin.
Yeah, sex in Latin. It's not going to be that easy.
Not Latin
Okay, well-
America.
We'll get
It's the
back to
smartest
it.
thing you heard.
I promise you.
If you get any pictures, don't show us.
Sextus. No, that is Sextus is one of them.
But okay,
A Canubian.
okay. I'm
Just make
sorry.
it.
Just make it up.
No, that's. I was going to. I said you
Okay.
made your point.
I'm sorry. I had a point, and it was going to be really good because it was going to be how it's like X, which means like apart and together, and then it's like boom, the cross.
Boom, the cross.
I mean, Michelle, the X's are the same link, so it's more like the feminine cross for the pagan cultures. but close enough.
Let's make fun of her. You know, since she has the bear, we can make fun of her.
Okay, here go, Rach, because you wanted it, right? Well,
I like the boom, the cross.
That is a T-shirt that needs to be made.
Boom, the cross.
That is the cross.
thanks, Skype, for putting up with that with me.
Well, one thing that I'd really love to see more of is wholesome images of relations. Okay, so that was the cross.
Oh, we were just giggling because we have the same handwriting almost.
Yeah, so.
Wholesome images.
No, so to use using the same handwriting concept.
Okay.
Two people who are why not? Two people who are having a worldly relationship. It's like I'm either tugging in opposite directions, or I'm like smushing face, like smush face, like oh, I love you so much, kind of like pug dog kind of love, because you don't have like a natural way to have relationships. So you have a dog and you're like always smushing it. If two Christians have similar handwriting and their spouse are partners in that way, there's a very subtle, more delicate relation among them. And I'd like to see more imagery in art of wholesome relationships. We have plenty of either wrong relationships or complaints about wrong relationships. We have lots of imagery of that. But I'd like to see more beautiful pieces that give us something to work toward.
Right. No, you're right. too, what's so problematic is we're so used to negative images of sex that any effort to depict sex in an alternative light is going to immediately be viewed in that context. I mean, Rachel, what you're saying, we're so surrounded by sexual imagery that it would be hard to see. I think it would be very easy to say that a very high percentage of the male population wrestles with pornographic addictions. I think it would be very easy to say that adulterous thoughts are everywhere. We've really gotten ourselves into a pickle when it comes to the issue of sex. And that's because it is so vital to our existence, therefore it is so corruptible. So, I mean, it's only natural for evil to go after sex, because if you get sex, it's only a matter of time before you get the whole culture. Because when you rob the very heart of what it is to be human, the human experience, then it's only a matter of time before the human no longer wants to have that experience. Yes.
So I was just thinking, here's a metaphor. If we have a ravine or some kind of place where there's a river at the bottom and two cliffs, what we see in our culture a lot is Evel Knievel's like trying to fly across it, or somebody shooting something and it blowing up, or somebody falling down the cliff screaming, or somebody trying to rescue somebody who's falling down the thing screaming, or somebody dropping bombs from an airplane, things like this. And we don't see enough of like the slow process of people building a bridge. One time I saw a video on the internet of some people building a bridge by hand, and it was a very long documentary, and all it was them getting all the parts to build this bridge, and how amazing it was once it was there. They didn't have to swing from vines anymore. But could we get the patience to learn how to see how bridges are built?
Right. To your point, art today, it falls into the dichotomy that Rob Bell mentions in his book, Angel and Animal. It's either really animalistic, where it's just barbaric, violent sex and just sensualization, or it's angelic in the sense of it's too perfect, it's unblemished, so we can't connect to it as human beings.
And all of heaven is housed in that moment.
In the moment of...
In the romantic moment in the movie or whatever.
Oh, yeah,
all of heaven is packaged in that period of time.
That's right. That's right. Most art is it's kind of climactic versus sustainable in the sense of it's showing you kind of how to climb, rather than this. You have this climax in your life, and then it goes back into a resolution. The very nature of a story arc is to climb toward a climax and then to descend. But the nature of the gospel narrative is to you have Eden, fall, but then you're forever climbing from that point. So there is no kind of dip resolution. Pascal, there's that famous quote where he says something along the lines of, man is neither an animal nor an angel, but with his relationship through Christ, he can actually rise above the angels. But again, you got to have that balance between the perfect and the actual. I think, too, a problem which I have with, say, sex in movies is I don't think I've seen... I'm going to leave this door unlocked. That's just fine. That's just fine. The problem with it, too, I can only think of one movie in my entire life that I ever saw in which the sexual dimension of the movie was justified by the plot. It was actually needed. It actually was logical within the story. Other than that, I've never seen a single movie or read a single book. Let me think. I don't think I've ever read a book in which the sexual part of it I went, wow, that was needed. That brought out a plot element. That was great. Most of the time it's there and it's brutal, and they're like, and the reason the author puts it there is like, yeah, this is the real world. This is how it is. It's stuff going down. But actually, really good people who wanted to really terrify you with the truth would kind of actually omit it. Just like in, say, a movie like Jaws, you don't see the shark very often, but the fact that it's not always present actually makes it more terrifying. There's just very rarely does it actually need to be depicted in a movie, does it actually need to be described in a plot, rather than just pointed to. The only one that I've ever seen where I thought it was justified was a movie and play. It actually is a play called In Butterfly. That's it. It's actually an extraordinary play, and it's an extraordinary movie, and I suggest it to everyone. It's based on Madame Butterfly, but play off of that. That's it. Other than that, I can't think of a one. So another problem with this art code, one of the challenges of artists today that I think that Christians can actually lead is figuring out a way to integrate sexuality into art pieces that are justified by the art rather than just dropping them in like is common today.
Yeah, first, when you were talking about sexuality being a part of us, I mean, if you think about it, the only thing in the Bible that is kind of certain about human beings is like, in the beginning there's male and there's female. Like everything else is kind of like, you're not black, you're not woman, you're not this or that, you're not a Roman. It's like the sense of identity for everything else is pretty much relative. God's like, you're in Christ. Yeah. But God pretty much does say at the beginning, like, look, this is a representation of me. You are male and you are female, because it points back to me being male and female perfectly in one. So there is something very interesting about that, because it does permeate everything that we do, and that when you watch TV, like, why is the thing that dominates TV and songs typically about relationships? Most of the songs are not centered around, like, I'm working in the garden. You're not singing about work. You're not necessarily singing about
laptop.
Everything is about how I love this girl, and like you're saying, it's heaven. She's my angel, and we're so.
If only I could be with that person, then I'd be happy.
Yeah, I'm so enraptured in this. So there is something very fundamental about our core. Oh, what? Thank you, Ben. So there is something very fundamental of our nature being intertwined with sexuality, relationships.
A desire for completeness.
Yeah. So yeah, you're saying we can't escape that. So there was something more there, I can't remember. But going on to what you were saying too about art, which I think is interesting. It's like every time I see, like you're saying, every time I see a movie on TV, and it's like 3, 2, 1, and the sex scene. It's like they know, it's coming, they know it's coming, and it's not even like
logical.
And it's not even done anymore to be like, hey, this is what happens when two people get together. It's just like, oh yeah, did we got a sex scene in there? Oh dang man, all right, sex scene. Okay, and it's like it's just put in there because it's
Why
like.
don't they just show somebody power washing the house next door?
Right.
But it's like what you're saying. It's so wrapped up in our sexuality. It's like it's so tied to who we are that people know they have to put it in there, or people will be disappointed, but they don't know how to put it in there anymore without it being gratuitous.
Yeah, right.
The other thing, what was I going to say? There's something else about how we do sex and art. I'll get to that later maybe. But the other thing I was thinking about was sort of related to our conversations we had about curse words in the past. There's something parallel about curse words and sexuality. We know there's something there because you can get on the stage and be like, sex, and everybody's like like they laugh and they don't really know why, but we know that there's something there you can push and people will react, and so people don't even have to try hard to make sexual jokes because it's just sex and it's funny. Why?
Right.
And I think it's partially because something else he mentioned in the book. He's like, when Jewish couples used to get married, they used to be under this like chuppah, and he was like, nobody else was under there but the two of them.
And the rabbi.
Or the rabbi. But he was making the point, he's like, in our culture today, like, nothing is sacred.
Right.
Like, your sex life is on TV, reality shows, there's nothing hidden, because there's this sense that it's like, you're being vulnerable. Like,
They
I'm
even
not...
make little videos that you can have in your panties.
Really?
No.
Oh, I thought... I wouldn't be surprised. But no, there's this sense now that if you're like putting your entire life on TV in its nakedness, you're being brave.
Wow.
Because look, I'm showing you my sexuality. Nothing is hidden. But he was making the point, he's like, there's some stuff that's okay to not be known by everybody. So there's something there with intimacy and privacy that... There's something there about how sex points to privacy and intimacy. But again, thinking about words, if you think about the word intimate, we automatically assume that means sexually intimate. Because we had a guy who preached in our church once. He was saying, like, how Jonathan and David were really close, and how John rested his head on Jesus' breast, and like we don't see anything like that with men nowadays, because if a man and a man are intimate, then they are homosexual, and we can't have it. So the idea of intimacy being something I think that's strictly strictly related to women typically, like, oh, women, they can hug each other and hold one another and they can caress, but if two guys get anywhere physically close, there's something wrong with that. So we've made intimacy even, I think Michelle was next. But
I just have to just sentence, but I guess that's a cultural thing. I mean, in the East, men kiss each other and a greeting. But part of the reason that it's not a part of our culture, though, is probably because our culture is so sexualized, heterosexual.
Yeah.
So
I think that's true. Why do
If it were bubble gum, it would be a good time to blow a big bubble. I'll send it back to you when you remember. That's right about men. I was very impressed when I went to India to see young men walking hand in hand, talking, even with our arms around each other, walking down the road, just enjoying each other's company and not having any problem with that.
I saw a documentary on that.
Really?
It was about guys who hold hands, and people walking up and it's like, "Are you guys in love?" And I was like, "No, we're just friends." It's like, seriously? But yeah, that would never happen here.
But
Never happen in America without it meaning something else.
Or without being bullied.
yeah, that's right.
The word that comes to mind when you say privacy and intimacy, to me, related to pop culture, is violation. Our sense of privacy and intimacy in movies and such is actually more of a depiction of violence and violation than intimacy in the sense of gentleness in close quarters.
Yeah.
I remember what I was going to say now. Yeah. Thank you so much, man.
Yeah, gentleness in close quarters. Like when you see her with the little thing, she's not like chewing its ear off or something.
Mm-hmm.
That's too vicious. She's gentle. She wants to care for it.
I think too. What I was going to say, I'm just going to say two things. The first thing is that I think, like Bernard, you mentioning about how there's some things that we don't have to have as public knowledge. I think that makes me think a little bit about like accountability in the Christian culture. Like, I think that there is a place for learning wisdom and like learning that as you grow up. I think though at the same time, like if we keep knocking young Christians over the head though with the idea that you better we can't talk about sex, but also you better not talk about it. Or no, sorry, does that make any sense? Yeah. So then it's like
right.
I don't know, I think there's something about it that it's like we can't talk about it until you've done something wrong. Now we need to talk about it.
Right.
And it's like,
That's
okay, that doesn't
exactly right.
that does not help people understand about sexuality and its place biblically speaking and in our lives and in our relationship with God. And I think like the accountability factor, or sort of the idea that we better, like I was saying, we're not going to talk about it as we're seeking wisdom. We're only going to talk about it when you've screwed up, essentially. It makes people really, I think, hesitant to, I don't know. I don't know if we're going about learning about it the right way necessarily. And it's just different for everyone's particular circumstance, their youth groups, their Bible studies, etc., etc. But I think one of the best ways that we could maybe know, really understand its place would be to, ask God for wisdom on the matter, but also to have conversations like this, and possibly at an earlier age. I don't know. I think that could be helpful. One more thing, sorry, Handsome. I don't know what's wrong with my brain today.
Just hold on to the bear until it comes back. Don't let anybody else have the bear.
No one.
No one can have the bear. Shackleberries. Oh well. I'll get it. I'll get it back.
What do you have to say on this matter, Daniel?
Yeah, did that make any sense what I just brought up?
Yeah.
Okay, because
Well, there's no reason for the church to teach on sex because the public school system does it, just like there's no reason for the church to take care of the homeless because the government does it.
Well, that's the kind of that's exactly the kind of cynicism that I need modeled for me as a new Christian from my most trusted Bible-believing friends, because I need to make sure that I have people around me who are correctly modeling correct biblical cynicism.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Just kidding.
Right. No. Right. I mean, to that, that is, though, the unspoken spirit that kind of goes through. Of it's like, well, the schools do that. And also, parents naturally are uncomfortable with talking about it, as are the churches. Therefore, if there's any out that they can get to talk about it, such as, well, the school will teach it, then they'll take it. Just naturally will gravitate toward that.
Most will. But
so most will. I don't mean to make a totalizing statement, but also, I think it's very important. One, we know there's something wrong where it's controversial in a theological debate, rather or not. There's sex in Eden and sex in heaven. That shows that we naturally see something wrong with the act itself, which is problematic. Three, it's very important.
You don't hear that about nose picking and such.
That's right. No one debates that. But there's something that we have culturally done to ourselves that has made us believe that sex is innately bad. Unfortunately, the church fathers, well, the early church did not help with this in making not having sex more holy than having sex. In fact, I would argue that the reason Paul says it's better not to marry is because it's harder if you get married. It's actually more of a challenge, but too bad Jesus said that a man will leave his wife and that it's good not to be alone, so the hard route is very much there, if so guided by the Spirit. What I was going to say, it's very important that both man and woman were under the name Adam until after the fall. That means they were one flesh. The name Adam referred simultaneously to man and woman. They were one unit. It's not till after the fall that it's Adam and Eve, and that they're then divided. So that there was this understanding that male and female were a singular being, yet they were simultaneously two. Adam meant humanity. It could also mean, I think, white, red-cheeked white. But it meant both at the same time. So if God would have said Adam, both the man and the woman would have replied at the same time. And that, I think, too, although I couldn't confirm an evening, might be one of the reasons why in a marriage both parties get the same last name. I think that might kind of be part of it, but I'm not sure. Excuse me. So we can see by God's design that male and female are supposed to be one. Excuse me. And that something happens with sin that makes it to where we're more divided from one another. Therefore, love entails a marriage would be a relationship between a man and a woman, of which less and less sin is involved.
Did you?
To go back briefly to talk about the word intimacy and how, in most contexts, the word intimacy itself has the connotation that's going to be sexual, and yet that there's more to it than that. Something from my childhood came up. I don't think my parents would mind too much me saying this, but when my sister and I were growing up, there would be times where our parents would tell us that it was quiet time for them, and that was basically a way of telling us not to disturb them, and that basically what we would usually do is my sister and I would sit down with a movie and just be occupied for however many hours, and we just weren't supposed to bother my parents. It was only years later that I figured out or was told or found out that quiet time basically was a euphemism for them to be able to spend time together sexually. But in retrospect, I think that's actually an interesting way of looking at it, especially in the context now of this discussion about intimacy and how it is sexual, and yet there's more to it than that, or it's deeper. And the fact that to describe that time together as quiet time, it does involve the sexual activity itself, and yet it's a sense of retreat and just being together with the other person, and to have some things that are just between the two of you and quiet. So that came up earlier.
I was about 31 or 32 when I started listening to the Christian radio stations around here, and heard the first information about marriage from a biblical perspective, and that was the first time I'd heard it. I was fortunate to have been raised by two parents who are totally committed to one another and are still married and have a very good marriage. I didn't have any information, though, that any of my behaviors were actually going to cause complications for my own self later on. I really didn't know. Looking at now, looking to hope that at some point I would be able to behave well as a wife to somebody or as a parent. I have a lot to learn, and I'm starting now. I'm about 33, and I feel fortunate that I made it to this point at all before getting locked into a marriage without knowing this stuff. But the Bible is very, very clear about the roles of people in a family as God intends. He invented the family, and He invented man and woman to be married to one another and to have specific roles for one another, and how to raise a family correctly in a godly way. And I guess I'd like to see more good relationships depicted. I've seen a couple in movies a few times, and not very many times. And a few times in songs about a good attitude about how to relate to a spouse.
Right.
And the caring for children and the commitment to children.
Yeah, from a language perspective, I was just thinking about, as I was saying earlier, think about the word sensuality, sexuality, intimacy. Like, our minds immediately go towards sex itself. Because I remember I was teaching a class at church, and I put as a description, I said, going to be looking at art in all these different ways, and I said art through the lens of sexuality. And then when they printed it in the bulletin, it said as gender. Yeah. Because they were so afraid that the word sexuality was going to, raise it. Because the word sexuality automatically has this, explore your sexuality. It's never used in just terms of masculine, feminine, male, female, man, woman. It's sexuality, Yeah.
It's said exactly like that.
Well, no, it is. I mean, it's like when people use that word, it's always about exploring one's sexuality. Yeah.
Images of women's shaving goo come to mind. Like putting the goo on your legs and scraping it up with a thing, that you can buy.
And the other thing,
Venus shaving product.
Yeah, you're a goddess. I'm your Venus. I'm your fire. Your desire. Yeah, desire.
This is a brand, isn't it?
No.
You don't see people plucking hairs off of a breast.
Yeah, it is a brand.
But
sorry, I'm so sorry, Michelle.
But even the word desire, think about it. We were talking earlier about passion. You can have a desire for making a poem or for painting a picture, but desire is always what is your desire? It's always sexualized. And so that's that blurring between the creative passion and the sexual passion, I think. From another language standpoint, like what Rachel was talking about, this deals with sex more as like masculine, feminine, man, woman. But I was thinking, it's interesting how you're saying like there's no good pictures of relationships. Is because
it's either like too physical or it's like an exaggerated chivalry.
Yeah. Right.
But even just embedded into our language is friction. It's like men versus women, the opposite sex, like the battle of the sexes. It's never portrayed as complementary coming together. It's always like, what do they do that you hate, that you need to, fix, or what do they do that 50 tricks to get him, get what you want from him. All right, one last thing. Well, then you can say your thing, but I was going to throw out a question to see what everybody thought. Speaking of art and sex, the question is, how do you think Christians should represent sex in their art, whether it be film, poetry, music? Because especially for film, like I've had that question, and I was like, oh man, what if I did want to portray something in a movie? Because then it comes into that whole question of, oh, well, I have other Christians watching me, so they're like, I can't believe Bernard made a movie and there was like skin showing and sexual scenes. So you have that coming against you, because other people who watch, they don't really care. They'll be like, oh yeah, he put sex in the movie, great. So that's the question I want to throw out to see what you guys think about.
Rachel had a point.
Well, one thought was very simply, our language does skip over several steps of thinking. Our language is cram-packed of basically deceptive shortcuts.
Right.
The word because, for example, is used often to cause a link between one thing and another thing in our minds that isn't actually physically true. It's a logical jump from one thing to another that is far removed from what really happens. I could say, I got sick because companies don't label their products.
Right.
And that could sound like a true statement, but it's not. It's so furry all along. If I were to actually follow that step of logic, it's our language is cram-packed with lies, basically. And we want shortcuts, and we want to have a sugar-coated view of what our society is doing. So that's one thing. Oh gosh, I missed the other one.
Thank you, Rachel. Christians think the word sex is innately tempting. That if I say the word sex, then everyone now at the table is thinking about sex and having sex.
Donuts.
Consequently, we can't have sermons about it. We can't have teachings about it, because we're afraid that if we talk about sex, it will make people want to have sex. Which is one of the ironies of censorship, perhaps, is when you censor things, then that actually makes people want to explore it in their own way. And if they don't have wisdom and knowledge and instruction, they don't know how to do it. So they take it into their own hands and find themselves in a dilemma. Bertrand Russell, in his essay collection at the end, he very interestingly said, if people were allowed to just go around in public naked, sex wouldn't be a big deal. If you live like in the Greek and Roman cultures and it was just part of everyday life, then we wouldn't be so concerned about people having sex. That's totally impossible for our Western conscious to believe, but it was kind of a sociological. He said if you always grew up, imagine if you had always grown up in that. It would just be a very different way of viewing the world. The implications of which I'll leave to your imagination. To Rachel's point, what we need is a movie that says, well, it was realistic. You have two people get married, Their first night of having sex, the guy comes out irritated. They don't have a clue what to do. It's not really the greatest thing that ever happened to them. It's actually kind of awkward. They don't know what's happening. The next day, she's irritated about the fact that he brushes his teeth different than she brushes her teeth. He just doesn't think about things that she naturally thinks about, and vice versa. And what the plot would simply be about is how, because they're committed, because they are not walking out, that they overcome these things, become one flesh, and then the beauty of the sexual act of becoming one with someone through time, and then ending with the two old people sitting on the porch watching the sunrise. The one old person, or both of them.
With great-grandchildren.
With great-grandchildren. And the joy that comes from that. And the last thing I'll say, Bernard, make a movie called Sex that is about painters, athletes, and there's never a single sex scene in it. It just depicts like all of these productive activities, but the name of it is sex. So everyone goes in thinking it's pornography, but it's an art. It's about painting.
But it's like not rated.
It's not rated. It's not rated.
Too high for rating.
There's no, and that will be an extraordinary experience for people, because people go in thinking there will be sex in it, and it's all these other things. So that will force them to think about those things as sexual.
Kind of what you're saying about like everybody going around naked. There is an interview here with Angelina Jolie where she's doing Tomb Raider 2 or whatever, and in the picture they had taken of her, she was wearing a tank top, and you could see her nipple outline through the tank top, and they airbrushed it out because they were like, oh, it's creepy. And so the interviewer kind of asked her about it, like just kind of scared, and she said, yeah, they airbrushed it, and I asked them to put it back in because it's part of my breast, and the guy said, well, I guess it's just not very kid friendly. And Angelina's like, actually, it's very kid friendly because that's how I do my baby. So it's like we make people obscene, like we make the breast obscene. Like,
that's right.
How do we do that?
That's so right.
Well, yeah, to what you're saying about people being more concerned about something when you tell them not to do. I always found that interesting, especially with like going back to censorship and curse words. To me, I guess I always thought when people would bleep out curse words, I'm like, aren't you just drawing attention to the word? Like, shut the up. It's like, why don't you just let him say the word? Now they know he's saying something bad. But it's funny, like Ben was showing me this skit by these guys named Key and Peele on Comedy Central. So I started looking at some of their other skits, and one of them was like they were dressed up like these two Arabic guys, and they were in a Muslim country, and like these women were walking back and forth. He's like, oh, look at that one. I almost saw the bridge of her nose. Ooh, I'd like to go kiss that. You know, like, ooh, I saw a little bit of toe. You know, just the fact that these women are so covered up that seeing them, you know, even just a little bit of skin is, you know, exciting. But
I want to see more depicted men, of men saying, no, I'm going to choose not to look at these women, because what we're doing today is we're building a house, and we need to go fetch the wood for this house that we're building, and that's what we're doing today, and we're not looking to the women. It's part of my growth as a man not to look at these things.
Right. Well, that's right. Restraint.
We'll get to that.
Are you warm enough? I haven't offered you a coat.
I am all right. Yes.
Okay,
please stop worrying about my welfare and just be okay. Be okay with my situation.
I will be okay. I'm gonna call my grandma.
Have a good time.
I'll be upstairs.
Have a good time. You're cool.
But to what you're saying too about the sex, like making a movie that's athletes, basketball, athletes, painters, and whatever going to work and calling it sex.
Do it.
No, we shouldn't do that because it was
cat sex.
But no, I was thinking about when you were saying that. Just okay, like for instance, the one night stand, and he talks about this in the book. He says in a Sex Guide, he says whenever one person is tempted into adultery, lust is not the main driving force. He says the main driving force is you're able to look at another human being and say, I no longer find anything of interest in you.
Correct.
He's like, the lust might be the sort of straw that breaks the camel's back.
Right.
Because you're bored. Oh, here's a girl next door. This is exciting.
Not even bored, but bitter.
Or that.
Yeah.
This negative resentment grows in people.
Right.
And it gives them an excuse to do something that they would otherwise say that they shouldn't be doing, and they would know.
But yeah, I thought it was an interesting point because, you know, it's not necessarily the lust of sex that is the main problem, but it's the fact that something else in that relationship has not been fulfilled. Because if you found complete fulfillment in that person, then you would no longer be looking outside of that person. It's the same thing like we were saying last week with God and pleasure. If you're completely pleasured with God, temptations wouldn't even have an effect. So taking that, there's something about our desire for mystery and adventure and wanting to be exhilarated that is found in how we've like packaged sex into these one night stands, into these like quick moments on TV where it's like the sex scene comes on and it's like, what's what you're saying about the marriage that made me think about it. Yeah, the guy waking up and saying, oh honey, I'm gonna overcome because you like to brush your teeth this way and I don't, and then you like going to plays but I don't, but I like playing golf on Sunday but you don't. It's like nobody wants to see that because it's not this intense, exhilarating, very compressed moment of passion and sex.
That's right.
Like, there's something about the one night stand that makes us go, yes, that's what I want. I want to like sleep with somebody who I've never met, and I've never, this mystery, and I don't know what's. So there's this desire for the unknown, this desire to like.
We need good artists.
Yeah.
You can figure out.
Yeah.
By hard analysis and thinking, how could we depict these things to be fascinating to an audience? Because there's established methods of sensationalizing stuff.
Right.
Sensationalizing stuff, all you need to do is plug in a different person, a different scene, in a different scenario, different limits and different pullings, and boom, you have a new looking story.
Right.
This person wears angled earrings and has long hair, and that one doesn't, and this one has heels on.
Right.
But to make the harder things look intriguing to an audience requires creative investment of time to design it with purpose to make it new.
Yeah, but it also requires a completely renewing of the mind, because like you're saying, to have a movie where two guys are like, oh man, there's a hot girl walking by, but I'm gonna go work, like nobody's gonna make that movie because the predominant mindset is that girl walks by, guys look, that's the way life is. I mean, I was just watching noticing shows about kids in high school. Like, that's what you're taught. A girl walks by, you go, it's like that's what you're taught as a boy from a young age, that girl walks by, tongue goes out, you go crazy.
I wish they had told me that boys are doing that. I had no idea.
Well, that's the thing. We're all
I would go somewhere, I wouldn't be wearing a bra. I just go there thinking that they're seeing me the same way I see them, which is I'm one of the guys.
Right.
And I wouldn't know that I'm distracting them because I'm wearing a t-shirt without a bra. No idea. I was probably 25 or 30 before I realized that was part of the problem.
But yeah, so there's got to be a renewing of like you're saying, the mind in general, as I was saying earlier, to bring sex back into this thing where we see it as something that is wholesome and we don't kind of like, what's the word, scoff, or like we're not cynical about it. Because like when I hear people preach like, treat girls as sisters and women in the church as mothers, and you as a man in America, you hear that, you're like, what? Like you're like, what? My sister? No, I want to date her. I don't want to see this woman as my sister. So the fact that our minds are so tuned to what the world sees sex as, I think is one of the major problems. Yes. We have to have a complete paradigm, because it's very hard as a man in America to see a girl and think, I'm just going to look at you platonically and I'm not going to, think beyond that. Especially too because, like I said, all the songs and the poetry and the music is constantly saying like, men and women belong together only in this kind of like super hyper, romantic context. It's never just, there's hardly songs that are like, she's my best friend. We just hang out. We do math homework together. I mean, you don't see any, just look at all the songs.
And I'm looking down her shirt while she's doing her math homework.
Think about all the songs from a little kids, it's just girls like, just little kids hear these songs and like, do you even know what you're singing about? No, but they make these songs for kids partially, I think, because they don't know what else to write about. It's like, oh, I write about my girlfriend, so these little kids obviously have the same mindset, right? If you have the worldly mentality, they have no idea how to raise their children. They just think that their kids have the same mentality as them, which is ridiculous, and they just pass it down.
Yeah. something the church could do, to Rachel's point, since a Christian who makes art needs time and energy in order to come up with what you're describing, Rachel. The church could fund artists, because if they do not, the artists will not have the opportunity space by which to do that, and no piece that describes sex in the right way will be funded by the world. So if the church actually wants to, quote unquote, affect the culture, it would stop fighting the culture wars and invest in culture making, because that's how you win the quote unquote culture war. Because culture by definition isn't a war; it's a community. And when you look at it as a war rather than something you make, like a gardener who plants seeds and grows corn or flowers, which fits with many biblical parables, then you'll find yourself in a dilemma.
Or put shiitake mushroom powder into the log.
What's to make the mushrooms grow?
Yeah.
I like mushrooms. Mushrooms are good. My grandmother would make them. Here you go.
Get it to stop. I'd like to see more brothers of sisters depicted in movies, like a boy who has a sister and how he cares for her and about her, or a sister who has a brother who he cares for, and I've seen a few of these in documentary kinds of things. Not very often. Maybe in some adventure kinds of movies where boys and girls are traveling together on some adventure, have I seen stuff like this, where some young people have a kindly brotherhood with someone else. But how can we see females as a sister if we don't see pictures of sisters?
Right.
Of boys, like boys having sisters in movies.
Well,
I don't see that a lot, do you?
I do that a lot in that relationship.
People are loners in movies.
Yeah.
They're like,
that
just meets.
That relationship is important in my work, so we'll get them to you, because that, I think, is, your point is very valid. Older movies, older works, that would be shown a lot. Today what's shown is that men are animals. And so they act like animals. Also, they're told by the feminists that they're animals, and they're told by the entire culture that all they want is sex. So then men are trained to think that all they want is sex. And then the women are shocked when all the men want are sex. And then the women assert that they don't need the male. So the male's like, fine, I don't need you either. And now you have the one-night stand culture. So you have these liberation movements that actually are quite enslaving for the psyche. Because definitely, there's many people, many intellectia, who think that marriage should be gotten rid of. That marriage is a silly thing. There's no point. There's no reason for it, which is tragic. I think too, which would help the Christian mind when it comes to sex, is to look at Dante. In Dante, the his eros is what leads him to agape. His eros of Beatrix, his love of Beatrix, is actually is what leads him to the agape, or to God. The problem, sexuality, when it's in the right order, in an Augustine sense, actually leads you to God. And also, there's a kind of, in that sense, there's an eros relationship between Dante and Virgil through the Inferno to about the end of the Purgatorio, and then it's Beatrix, because he admires Virgil. He thinks he's the greatest poet of all time. And that eros, and also what's interesting in Dante, there's a way in which all beautiful things give off eros. You relate to all beauty sexually. And you start to get how sex is at the core of everything when you get that everything at its core is beautiful. Beautiful is at the very core of all being. Even the most evil of evil is just privated. It's been, the window per se is cloudy, very cloudy. But there's a way in which eros is what a beautiful thing radiates that attracts you to it. And if you get that, then you can see how an elderly couple can have sex. You can see how them planting the garden together is sexual. Then you can see how, say, reading a book or what we're doing right now is sexual. But that gets into, lastly, how the theology of beauty has been lost. And if we had a clearer understanding of the importance of beauty, we would also get a clear understanding of what it means to say the word sex.
Yeah, when you say theology of beauty, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
I have no concept of it.
Right, it's not
the
even...
The word beauty is lost from my mind from several years of hardship.
Right, it's lost from most of us.
The word beauty is gone, and I go there when I go to an art museum. I kind of vaguely remember something, like I used to appreciate things.
Right.
And it feels like it's out of reach.
Yeah, that's right. It's a vague concept. I think Bolasar is a theologian I've never read. I think I've heard he does work in it, but other than that, well, as a culture, we definitely don't, and that's what counts. We as a people don't embrace beauty. We don't know what it is.
Yeah, this made me think of a bunch of things. One being, as you're talking about sex, as we said at the beginning, how do we redefine sex? Because if I were to go to a church and say, well, you know, God is sexual, people would have a very hard time hearing that.
Yeah, they would.
Because I'm applying something that's supposed to be quote-unquote dirty to God, who's holy. But then, like you're saying about beauty, but think again about the language. Like when people talk about sex in the movies, it's like, oh, talk to me dirty. Oh yeah, we got real. Like it's all about sexual imagery is portrayed as something that is dirty, or like dirty being somehow a positive thing. Just like we say the word, you know, like, oh, that car is so bad, you know, that's sick, that's ill. It's like we use dirty in the same way to talk about sex. Like, oh, she's dirty. And so then it's like, I think your mind starts to mix up those two things, that sex is somehow equated with dirt, versus like you're saying beauty, something that you could watch and see as beautiful without corrupting your mind. The other thing I was thinking as you're talking was, we were talking about beauty,
Dante, Eros.
There's a couple of things, but one, okay, like you were talking about the old couple planting the tree, and how that's sex. Well, I think that also comes back to seeing ourselves made like God, in that God is complete, and that, you know, there's nothing that God does that's separate. It's like he's never only doing this or only doing that. He's doing everything at once. So we live in time, so it's harder for us to understand that. But you have to see how the planting of the tree relates to the sex, because the old couple plants the tree, they become closer together. Right. Then they go inside, have a cup of tea, and then they remember the memory of them planting the tree and the shared moment, and now they're both excited, and now they want to go have sex, and then they enjoy that moment, and then 2 weeks later they want to plant a tree, and they think about the sex. Like, everything is connected to everything else. So if you were to realize that every act of your life is going towards some kind of sex, as in sex the act, but also sex as a total, experience, then you will start to operate in that mindset. And it's like, I did some writing once, and I was talking about how, if a lot of husbands understood how their wives thought, they would realize that waking up in the morning and saying, "You look beautiful, honey," is a part of sex, because that's going to later in the day be something that she's going to be excited by, whereas you just think, "I want to do it now." It's like, well, you have to think about sex as the whole day, from her perspective. She's like, he said I was beautiful, he called me, he sent me this, he took me out to lunch, now we're going to have sex. But before, we had compliment sex, pursue me sex, lunch sex, everything is a version of sex to her. To the guy, maybe it's like
sexist.
Yes. Thinking about that, what else were you saying about beauty?
Beauty is
I got it.
Beauty is the art of sex.
This was related to what Rachel was saying, though, about wanting to see more sister and brother relationships. We're talking about how there's nothing portrayed in...
What?
She wants more brothers and sisters. Start being her brother.
Okay. That's fair. I will be her brother.
Okay, but like I said, if you're in church and you hear a sermon that says, see guys as brothers and girls as sisters and women as mothers, if you're in the church here and then you go out into the world here, you get under this umbrella where it's like, relationships all the time, and then you come here and it's like, no, platonic
Right.
relationships, and you're like saturated with all these images of constant sexual interaction. So then when you get here, you're bored. You're like, I don't want to see this girl as a sister. I want her to be my girlfriend. So,
Or the opposite, where you go out into the world, try to relate to somebody in
yeah,
a way you might have.
and they don't get it.
Yeah, frustrated because
They don't know how to
they're
do it.
staring at you, not listening to your words, because you're talking to them as if they're able to talk to you
Right.
in a professional, platonic way, and you're expecting that because you're used to doing it at church, and then you go somewhere and you don't really know who you're talking to necessarily.
Yeah, that's true too. But I was thinking about how that kind of where you feel what you've been taught in the world in your mind, and then you come to church and you try to renew your mind, so you have this kind of like feeling towards platonic relationships. I think that also relates to how we deal with God, and that people will say like, oh, you know, God, he wants to pursue you as a lover, and you're like, I don't want to hear about all this. I'm not the bride of Christ. I don't care about God pursuing me as lover. And you can't even take the
about God.
Yeah, you can't even take the metaphor seriously because your mind is so saturated with, well, how am I supposed to have sex with God? You know, if I'm the bride and he's the pursuing man, that doesn't even make sense. So it's hard for us to get that fulfillment in God as like the pursuer of us, because we don't truly see God as sexual. We see him as just like we see the sister in Christ, the brother in Christ, because we haven't allowed ourselves to see how God himself could even be sexual to us.
Even with a brother or sister, you're always like, even like little kids fighting over a toy or something.
Right.
Pushing each other over. It's not always fun.
I had something I wanted to say. I'm pressured. I can't remember what I was going to say. I know, right? That is the first. I'll remember in a second.
Alright, well, while you do that,
Wait, so I missed it. Is having sex good or bad?
I remember.
It's important that I know this.
Oh, it's very good, and we were saying sex is kind of the core of reality, and that sex is very good, or it can be very bad.
That's bad.
Yeah, right.
A lot of our discussion was about how the Bible's very, very clear on information about a man and a woman's role in a family, in a marriage, and raising families, and in an extended family, and that the sex in our culture is kind of separated from that element.
I talked about like roles, like the woman has to be the homemaker or whatever, and the man has to be the worker. Is that what you're saying?
Something like that.
Not really.
Okay.
The class is about sex, art, and God, and we've been sort of going back and forth on all the different things of that. Oh, okay. Well, Evan, I did not say you didn't know it, but no. What I was going to say is one. When it comes to what you were saying, Bernard, about the man waking up and thinking about treating the woman right throughout the day, well, the culture actually depicts sex as a service that the woman in a way almost owes the man, or it's something that the woman has to do to get a relationship. It's not viewed as this thing that the male actually needs to work at all. Actually, he just has to go to work, make the money, come home, and then the woman owes him sex in a way.
I feel like it's the opposite. I feel like women have this idea that they're doing men a favor nowadays.
What I was going to say. I'm glad you said it, because what I was going to say, but at the same time, there's a neurosis, which means there's a split personality going on, where then a schism, if you will, where then like what you're saying is occurring, and that gets into both how we were saying males are taught by culture that they're animals and that all they want is sex, and at the same time women are told not to just be a sexual object, that it's they who are doing a service to the male, or that they have a right to sex, and now it's just a war of the sexes. There was actually an extremely good article on that strange website Cracked once about this, about the double victimization sense that's going on in our culture, where males feel like a victim of females and females feel like a victim of males. And the worst situation you can have is when both parties think they're a victim of the other. That's when it's very hard to have a recovery. And that's when you really need the Holy Spirit. What I was also going to say was kind of a point that I think is interesting. In earlier cultures, wisdom was depicted as feminine, as Lady Sophia, Nirvana, I believe, as a tree, as a female goddess. And actually the men going out and laboring, there was a sense in which they were stupid. It's like, oh, you poor men, the reason you're going out and doing that is because you don't have the wisdom to know how to do it efficiently. You'd have lots of stories of sort of a hero or someone doing their best, and they couldn't figure out how to solve the problem until the feminine muse showed up and enlightened them on how to overcome it. That concept of the importance of wisdom has really been lost. And with that, I don't think it's by chance that you also lose kind of an understanding of the important relationship of how the male needs the female and the female needs the male. If the woman is not associated with anything higher, then they're kind of left to feel as if all they have is domestic tasks. And consequently, that's kind of depicted as inferior to the male going out into the city and doing work. And so then you start to have all of the pamphlets coming out in the 50s saying, women, your husband during the day gets to go out into the city and have fun while you're at home doing the housework, and that doesn't really matter. Don't you have a right to go out and have an adventure in the city? And then you start having all of the protests. And now we have the double victimization, because the males are like, you think I want to go out into the city every single day and go to a work? No, I don't want to. Fine, go out and do it. And then we have ingratitude between both parties, and it just gets worse and worse every moment. So I just thought I would actually like to do that. Say, Nick, do a study in which you find out why there was a shift on the association of women with wisdom, and then with that a loss of wisdom, the emphasis on wisdom altogether. Thank you.
What do you mean wisdom?
Wisdom being, there's intellect is understood as, say, 2 + 2 = 4. It's a fact. Knowing and memorizing facts and being able to observe and find facts. Wisdom would be the ability to see how those facts relate, the meaning of those facts, or the implications of those facts.
If a man goes out into the world, gets beat up at his job all day, comes home, and somehow, ideally, the woman would have gathered enough from all of her handiwork that she knows what to do to soothe the guy.
Yeah, that's right. That would be a way to look at it.
A sense of wisdom, which comes very much from her body, from things that are smaller than her, more subtle than her, where he's been out in the world fighting things that are bigger than him, like economic powers.
Yeah, there's a way to that. And also in earlier stories, to take Bernard's story last week, the husband woke up at night and said, man, those kids are out playing on the drums all night. How do we get them to stop? The male would be depicted in the story as going and screaming at them, and then they come back the next week. And then the woman would be the one who's like, why don't you go out and offer them $20? And then gradually offer them 10, and then say you forgot the money. I bet you they'll leave then. Like that wise sort of problem-solving kind of intellect. And the male would be like, yeah, that makes sense. It's really actually quite interesting. Women were depicted as superior to males very often, especially in pagan cultures. You would have more female priests than you would male priests. It was actually, when the Bible talked about having male priests, that was revolutionary, because most of the time it was a female who would be leading the temple. It would be the female who would be in the head of the religious matters. And unfortunately, we even have that today again in many respects, because the husband stays home, only the female goes to church, and the male delegates religious and Christian teachings to the female, which that's not good. You need to fix that. Needs to be fixed. Anyway, I've been talking nonstop for a minute there.
Only a minute.
Only a minute or 6.
I had a couple more points, and then I was going to do a poem unless anybody had anything else they wanted to say.
Poem?
Wait, Is it okay if I grab some of that turkey, or is it all gone?
I haven't even opened that.
I think I know that book.
What is
Did
it?
you say turkey?
The animal one.
You did say turkey.
Nope.
Oh, did honestly.
Nope.
It would be
This is
really
the
relevant.
Oh,
this is the brand new
Peter
poem,
Kraft.
Ben.
Okay, yeah.
Sexual Revolution.
This is
Sex
even
in
more
Heaven.
relevant.
Really good lectures. Everyone should.
You sent me.
Yeah.
Started listening to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could do that one. That's a short one.
You seen
I
that?
could do both
Every
of
now
them.
and then a man makes a mistake in his life.
Well, Ben wants me to do 2 poems.
You want me to write them down?
I didn't say I wanted to.
Well, maybe I will. No, I don't want to do
Peter
that
Kraft
one.
is awesome. Everyone listen.
That one, yeah, I don't want to do it. I'll do the second. Okay, so the last 2 points I was going to make. One, I was watching, I think it was John Piper. It's so interesting. The title is John Piper was called Sex and the Supremacy of Christ. I was like, what? So he basically made this point about one way to get your sexuality in line is to realize that rather than have it here where we think it is, he said what it is actually just if our life is Christ at the center and like finances, family, relationships, sex, like everything else is just a planet around us, a planet. Like Christ is the center, he's the sun, the source, the center of gravity of our universe. Every other thing in our life is just a planet that's pulled in orbit by his gravity. But we have this mentality of the way we perceive sex is like the planet is extra large, it's bigger than all the other orbits, it dominates. So he's saying to change your mind to realizing that sex is just like everything else. You know, just like this guy's saying in the book is that every part of our life comes under God's authority. So even sex is like that. But like I said, because it is such a big part of our being and the way it's represented in the songs, we have this larger than life picture of it. Like, how am I ever going to manage my sexuality? God's like, just like I manage every other part of you. Because that comes through, I forgot what article I was reading. This other guy was like, he was like, everybody wants to know, is there going to be sex in heaven? And then he said, well, I'm glad to know that you're going to get to heaven and say, I know you're here forever with me, Jesus, but I want to know if there's going to be sex too. You know, just making us realize how high we put sex. And then the guy who created sex were like, I know sex exists. I mean, I know you exist, God, but is sex going to be there? And he's like, I created sex. Don't you think I'd be much more pleasurable than sex? You know, like we said last week, at his right hand are pleasures forevermore. And the last thing on that point was sex. Hold up, let me finish. Sex, bringing it into orbit. Yeah, because it's like me and Daniel and Kenny and somebody, we were having this conversation about like, will there be sex in heaven? And we were realizing just by asking the question that we have this fear that there will not be sex in heaven, so we're going to be missing out on something.
Yeah, that's right.
Just like, you know, when Lucifer comes and is like, did God say you couldn't eat from that tree? He just doesn't want you to. He's like, there's always this thought in our mind that there's something greater,
that's
something being left out. So, also with that, me and Kenny were having this conversation about sex and intimacy and how that's related to men specifically, and that there's such an emphasis on that I can't. There was something about sex and intimacy in guys, and how basically guys are often portrayed as only wanting sex, but the problem is, it's not that they just want sex, it's they want intimacy, and sex happens to be a way to get to intimacy, but the two are never really pulled apart. And the fact that if you were getting that intimacy like from your father from the beginning and from your parents, like that part of your being. See, like even the fact that he laughs, like we don't like the fact that you get intimacy from your father. That's like, oh, you're not going to get intimate with your...
I don't. You don't. Well, but other people might.
Yeah, I mean, as I'm saying, that's part of the problem. If our parents were to provide that intimacy from the beginning, that would greatly impact how the rest of our lives go. Yeah. Because if you saw intimacy as something that you were getting, then when you saw that girl, you might say, wow, I'm really attracted to her, but I feel like my intimacy tank is fulfilled. You know, maybe I'm still going to want that later in life. You're not going to, like, that desire is not going to go away.
Well, that's the thing. If you don't have it, like, having sex isn't going to give it to you. So it's like, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah,
Well,
so
I guess you accept God is at like the point of the class.
I don't know, some random point you make.
Yes,
Well, yeah, I mean, that is true. It's like, but again, it's like, we don't see God as the pursuer. Like, we don't see God as sexual. So then when people say, well, let God be your lover, you're like, screw this. I don't care about God being my lover. Stop giving me these cheap metaphors. I want a woman now.
Yeah.
Because we don't really see God as sexual, even being able to fulfill sexual intimacy. Or maybe he doesn't necessarily fulfill sexual intimacy. He fulfills intimacy to the point that when you think about sex, you don't automatically equate sex with intimacy. You say, wait, I have this intimacy part of me which seems pretty satisfied, and though I desire to have this part, the sexual part, fulfilled as well, it's not such an urge. I think that's the problem. Like, guys were like, I gotta have it, I gotta have it, I gotta have it. But if that part of us was like contained, it was like, okay, I can wait. That intimacy part of me is fulfilled, so now I can wait on the like physical expression of that.
Yeah, you go first, right?
Well, that just brings to mind the desperation of needing or wanting a girlfriend, or
That's right. Yeah.
feeling that you have failed because you can't keep a girlfriend,
Right.
or something like this. What's underlying that is a desperation and a loneliness and a feeling that my life is not complete and my needs are not met. And that's from a man's perspective, that he's supposed to have a girlfriend or his friends will disapprove of him, or he will not be enough of a guy because he can't get a woman to be with him or something. Then there's the woman's side of it, where you have women who have lost their identity. They cut themselves, or they don't eat, or they see themselves as ugly, as a direct result of seeing themselves as being obliged to fill a role in an image of being somebody's girl, even just in passing. And then there's this emptiness of, if that's not happening at this very moment, now I'm alone by myself, there's a mirror and all I see is my flaw. And that's a part of the side of sexuality that we haven't talked about very much during this class today, but that's where the gospel is valuable, because it can take someone who has passed through one of these hard times of utter despair and loneliness, simply by going through times of not having a girlfriend or something, or having a breakup, and feeling like your life's now over because this person didn't call. I mean, people go through this many times a day sometimes, where their well-being depends on what someone says or whether someone shows up.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
With a more rich life, where you have a fellowship with somebody regularly, where you have a community of people, you're balanced out, you have more than just one person who's right in your face, who's part of your life, and you depend on that person. Instead, you go somewhere where there's several people around you, and they give you the idea that we're all in this together. I'm watching your head kind of go.
Oh, I'm just enjoying my turkey.
Yeah. Exactly. So enjoy your turkey. You know, but you're not sitting there like eating your turkey by yourself, like, I wonder if this is going to make my thighs the wrong color.
You know, I was actually thinking, like, man, I'm glad I'm eating some lean meats because, you know, it's healthy. So that's like kind of. Never mind.
But for some people, that becomes truly a source of very real pain.
Right.
There's these places where people go for a month to try to get off of drugs or whatever, because they've hit this point where they're no longer part of a community of people. They feel completely isolated, and the only image they have for themselves is, oh, here's a sex scene in a movie. That's the boy. That's the girl. That means that's me.
Right.
And he disapproves of her. Now she's lost. I guess that's how I should behave when someone disapproves of me. It's very empty.
Oh yeah. To your point there, and then to Bernard's, I have a theory that there is a correlation between the loss of the emphasis on the arts in a culture and a rise of the perversion of sexuality, because the imagination then goes toward sex. It then goes toward relationships and being accepted, rather than toward a work. When you have a project you gotta do or something you're passionate about,
and there's other people who are like, yeah, that's a good thing to be doing.
Yeah, you're not sitting around you're not sitting around bored with nothing to do.
I wish there were somebody to suck on my ear.
Right, yeah. You're not sitting around doing that. Because you have something to do. But likewise, though, if you're doing something you don't like, something that you're stuck in, that too will be a place where your imagination wanders to looking for fulfillment. And since the culture tells you sex is where you're going to find it, you're going to naturally gravitate toward the topic of relationships.
They don't have movies of how cool it is when you hit your thumb with the hammer really hard and you're like, oh, that hurts!
While you're building the house that you want to build?
Yeah, but I mean, you don't see people going around hitting their thumb with the hammer on purpose.
Right.
If we had sensationalized that,
would we do it?
In the media, everyone would be into that.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're into planking. They're into running into. They're into planking. They're into running into walls. I mean,
that's for entertainment.
Well, if hitting your hand was it for entertainment, there's a way in which we now treat sex as something to entertain us. It is kind of become an entertainment entity.
It's part of the reason people do it.
Well, yeah, exactly. It feels good. It's like that Gorilla song.
Video games are really, really, really fun.
Feels good.
Not necessarily any better than some sexual act or something.
Right, that's right. Well, what I was going to say is the reason that people have sex, and this is also how we can understand how you can... The reason you have sex is for pleasure. So on the question of when you have...
absence of pain.
Or the absence of pain. Or combined.
It's a biological imperative.
Well, it's a biological imperative, but the question is, it's definitely a biological imperative, but then the question is how to do it by that imperative. So you do it in a certain way, should you wait, what's the best way to release that, etc., etc.
And if you ate less corn syrup, you might not think about it quite so harshly.
That's very possible, based on who you are. But to your point, when you see God, your maximum, you're having maximum pleasure. That's what the beatific vision is. C.S. Lewis said that, to kind of ask, can you have sex in heaven, might be as absurd as while having sex. There's a story of where, a child asks the parents, and they're kind of explaining, a mother and where do children come from? And the mother and the father says, well, the man and the woman get together, and it's just the most wonderful experience there is. And the child goes, well, can you have chocolate? Can you have chocolate while you're having sex? That's not what he said, but that's what he's implying. He's so worried because in his mind, chocolate is the best thing in the world that during sex you couldn't have chocolate. The question of will there be sex in heaven might be as absurd as asking, can you eat chocolate while having sex? It probably is. I mean, you very much may be able to, but you'll be so taken by the beatific vision that you'll look at self like, what were you thinking? Why was that such a big deal? And I think the same thing is what a person thinks when they have a true love relationship where their true self is unified with another true being, and they have that pleasure, and they look back on their life when they used to think that sex was the ultimate thing, and they recognize it's as absurd as thinking that chocolate is the ultimate thing, and that's what it is to find love.
Or you can be like George Costanza in Seinfeld, he wanted to have sex, watch TV, and eat all at once. He's like, why haven't I thought of this before? All the things I love, all at once. Or heaven is like that. Final point to the father thing. I read this book where the guy said, he had a bad relationship with his father, and then I guess he got into the cycle of just like sleeping with all these women, or at least he was obsessed with women. But he said as he grew up, he started trying to repair that relationship with his father, and he found out the more that he spent time with his father, that desire to like go after women lessened and lessened, because that part of him was fulfilled. So I thought that was interesting. Alright, so to finish it off with a poem,
here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, Bernard Hankins.
I don't know what the title of this is yet. This
is a new one?
This is very new.
Man, this is an exclusive.
So here we go.
World Star.
Nice guys finish last, but we try hard. I believe in wearing love on my sleeve and letting down my guard. I put my faith in love. Even when it's hopeless, I'm a romantic with a wide heart. Hold nothing back. Put it all on the line. I don't like to hide scars. I wrote you long love letters, but you didn't appreciate the hours I spent. It meant nothing to you. You never even thanked me for the flowers I sent. No response. I went above and beyond. But then you complain how no one ever gives you the love that you want. At picnics, you sat there and picked rose petals, saying he loves me not. If you picked me, I guarantee it'd be he loves me, oh how he loves me a lot. You said you meet me in the garden. I was patiently waiting, nervous, palms sweating like blood drops, hastily pacing. I assume you were in your room, putting on perfume back at your home. I put on something nice, some spice, a splash of alabaster cologne. I saved you a seat, even prepared a place for you to eat. It was only an hour. Could you not stay up that long and wait for me? I've been waiting for you since before 4 o'clock. You stood me up. I still stood at your door and knocked. So either you plain forgot or you just ignored my knock. You left me hanging. What next? Won't be surprised if I get left hanging by my father. Most guys would have left by now and said, why bother? Last night, bachelor's party, betrayed with a kiss. How could you play me like this? You were supposed to be my best man. And now we've been best friends. I'm closer than your brother. Oh, that's right, you just see me as a brother. We're just friends. Familiar, acquaintances. Despair's the only thing I'm acquainted with. Misery loves company. I'm at my wit's ends. I want to kill myself. I have to kill myself. It seems to be the only way to get your attention. So that's it. I'll have to slash my wrist. Be sadomasochist just to have a kiss that's passionate. My love is blasphemous, ravenous, anti-pacifist. You never read my letters of love, so I'm writing you letters in blood. No more happiness. This won't be pretty, but pretty soon you'll see I'm the best thing you've ever had before. No more Mr. Nice Guy, I'm a bad boy. You may have had love, but I bet you've never had war. This is the last straw, bloodbath pour. I mean, what do I have to do to get through to you? To convince you that I think you're the most beautiful. My love wasn't good enough, so I had to turn this wedding to a funeral. I had a crush on you, but when you rejected me, I was crushed. Crucified in the crucible, bloody from beautiful, brutal, cruel, and unusual, mutilate me the immutable, naked and vulnerable, exchange my wedding suit for a birthday suit because it's a little more suitable. I'm a gruesome groom, gross and grotesque. How often have you seen a coffin next to a wedding dress? Your veil was torn, and we both were splintered, thirst for vinegar. Pallbearers had my hearse at our rehearsal dinner. You punched me right in the kisser, when all I wanted was to kiss you slow. So I hung my blood over the doorpost like mistletoe. But you treat me like I'm invisible. You don't even think I exist. I'm fed up with begging for your wink and your kiss. I'll put a ring on it, miss, and nail the cuff links into my wrist. I swear, pinky promise. My heels were bruised, real rouge, red pumps. You think I don't know the pain of your high heel shoes? Blood on the rosebud and hand from holding the dozen. Old and rugged, the handsomest husband, now hideous, ugly, disgusting, undesirable, unwanting, but wanting to touch you the prettiest. You got some nerve, acting like I don't deserve your love while I serve you on a pedestal. And I got some nerve, damaged from metal tools, blood red pools. That's why I'm so much better for you. What's he got that I don't got? He got maybe a few tattoos, a couple scars, a few studs, probably in his ears. I got your name engraved on my palms. Look at the scars. A stud nailed the studs. Man, my whole body is pierced. I'm the blood, the wine, the wood, the bread. I'm a stud. I'm fine. I look good even when I'm dead. I'm selfish, jealous. I'll kill God if I have to. Won't be the last in line. And I couldn't look at him, but if I caught you looking at him, I murdered that man between you and me. It was a passionate crime. Heart beating in my chest, bloody, battered, beaten, and bulging eyelids. And since you wouldn't accept my love, I had to give you my violence. This is disturbed love, murdered and stirred up. If you can see the word love in the middle of violence. All for you to say, my prince. One thing have I desired. It's for you to lift my veil up. You say most guys just want one thing, and that's to nail ya. Well, my darling, I'm a hung king, and I'm the one they nailed up. I'm a good man, but I'm a bad boy, and I broke the curse like a sailor. I was smitten with you, now I'm just smitten. The lion, the lamb, the tiger, the kitten, the lover, the fighter, the pauper, the princeman, the author it is written. Chaucer couldn't have penned this. The officer and the gentleman. I'm a Jew, but I'm a Gentile man. I opened up doors, I opened up the door. I'm owed to the knight's code. Your prince, knight in shining armor in on a white road. I'll fight for you, I'll even fight you. Meet me on the battlefield. Wield hardened steel until you yield your heart and shield. I'll kill you with kindness, a mercy mercenary. I'll infiltrate you with intimacy. I'll prepare a table before and eat with you until you're no longer my enemy, because all's fair in love and war. I'll hunt you down with nothing more than goodness and mercy. I'll settle the score. My pen is mightier than the metal of swords. A sword in my mouth. My words are piercing bladed weapons. Bring any lady in my presence to her knees. She's slayed in this crusade of heaven. I went through painstaking to give you my namesake, my dear, so let me warn you. I'll adorn you with this crown, but the rose comes with the thorns too. I bled. Tread a trail of rose petals back to your bed. So women are right. Chivalry is dead. Because your looks get killed. And they did. Your face was hid from mine, but now you couldn't see my face and live. From homely to comely, longing to hold you, now you can't even behold me. My arms are open wide, eternally nailed, waiting for you to come. And if you saw the love in the middle of violence, you can see the hug inside of hung. I so badly wanted to wrap you tight and pull you close so we could dance, cheek to cheek and hand to nail-scarred hand. I'm seated on a throne, but somehow I still don't like eating alone. I just wanted to sup and dine with you, sip from a cup of wine for two. I was pulverized, mulched to a fine pulpy wine on a plank. I literally pined for you. My flesh was meshed in the wine press, so your lips could be pressed to mine. Let me count the ways, 39 with a cat of 9, but I'm coming back like a cat with 9, and best believe I'll be dressed to the nines. I'll be wearing a vesture that's designed. Bride, I'll be standing next to mine, and she'll be wearing a dress that's so fine. Model in my tux, bottles up, mazel tough. She gonna be hot without a spot, wrinkle, or blemish. And you're right when you say nice guys finish last, because it is finished at last. I'm the beginning and the last. I'm the alpha and the omega male, who's forever nailed, the one who never fails. I'm the most masculine spouse, coming after you now with passionate power, ravenous devour. If you really want to know what my wrath is about, honestly, I'm just asking you out. I know supposedly it's the man who's supposed to propose on one knee. You didn't choose me, you were chosen by me. But really, I think it should be you who's down on both knees.
Just to be back a little more so.
Thank you, Mr. Hankins.
Thank you.
Wow. That's pretty good. Yeah, pretty.
Can I do it again?
Just joke. There was a lot in there, though. It took me like, 4 or 5 lines just to process one, so I missed most of it. But I like the one that says, "See the hug inside of hung." That did some mental backflips for me, just to see how the hug would be in hung. Yeah, that was pretty good, Bernard.
That was very...
Yikes.
Thank you, Bernard.
I think you stole my wield skill.
Because you're the only person who's ever rhymed wield and steel. Ben has copyrighted the words wield and steel.
I think it's important that we see ourselves as a collective of artists who do play off of each other's ideas.
I copyright the letter B. You use B, I got you. I got a contact. You use body.